Physicians keep learning after medical school in order to better save lives. Shouldn't Christian leaders keep learning to better save souls? Hi, I'm Dr. John Nyhoff, president of Wesley Biblical Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi, and online around the world. Are you a Christian leader who thinks it's important to keep learning? WBS online weekend and evening classes allow graduate students to become better equipped to make disciples in a constantly changing world. For more information, visit wbs.edu.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Love is everlasting, love is only kind, love is
Cornell Belcher, is this good politics for 2018? That seems to be the sort of, I'm a cynic here, this looks like a stunt.
I actually think this lawsuit is ill-conceived, and I'm not very supportive of it.
Spectacularly ill-timed, a Betsy POTUS strategy portraying a sober and essential probe as a partisan vendetta. Everyone should chill out and let Mueller do his job.
Clark McCaskill's office called it a silly distraction, the lawsuit.
And instead, you're talking about a lawsuit, and who knows if it ever goes anywhere. Why the distraction?
This is nothing new.
I'm sure this will help fundraising, but beyond that, I think it's a sideshow.
And it really is kind of a questionable move by the DNC.
How much of it do you think is just a stunt versus a pretty smart ploy for court of public opinion?
100% stunt. I don't think that the DNC has been able to do anything more than speculate based on the statements in their complaint.
And one more reason not to take the lawsuit seriously is that it's not clear if it even can survive a motion to dismiss it.
Well, I'm not supportive of it. Whether it's a mistake or not, we'll soon find out.
It seems like the Democrats can't seem to hit a home run on any level.
Honestly, it's just a way to raise money.
Wow. So just in case you're wondering, the voices you just heard are not those of a bunch of Republicans. Those are Democrats on TV discussing the fact that the Democratic National Committee has filed a lawsuit against not just President Trump's campaign, so the campaign, but also a number of other organizations, WikiLeaks and the Russians, because, you know, we never want to have good relations with any huge countries like Russia now, do we? So welcome to the show, everybody. Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. And we have a jam-packed show again for you. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037. And who's coming on today? Mattie Duppler. She's the founder and CEO of Forward Strategies. She's going to come on and talk to us about the midterms. But that's in hour two. This hour, we're going to delve into a little bit of double standardville with the Democrats' media arm, which is CNN, and Dana Bash. Now, normally, I disagree with Dana Bash, her political positions, and sometimes in the interviews, she can be good, like hard-hitting, and other times she's just, you know, it's a friend, it's another Democrat, you know, whoopee. But in this case, she's actually spending time attacking Kellyanne Conway, who I've always had an admiration and respect for because of her work as a pollster and then as the first woman campaign manager to ever lead a campaign, a presidential campaign, to victory. And so it's, you know, it's a lot of things when you look at Kellyanne Conway and what she does. It's like, hey, you know, this is someone who's impressive. And leftists have never given her just due because she's on the right. And women on the right aren't really women. We're just puppets for our husbands. Ask Hillary Clinton. And so this was really surprising to me because I understand there are questions, and I even understand how you have a guest on, you want to ask him a question. You can almost tell when the interviewer or the host is a little uncomfortable because they want to ask this question. They feel like they have to ask it, but they know the reaction might not be what they're looking for from the guest, but they plow through anyway. But this seemed really petty. And I mean petty like in the internet meme sense. Like, let me just get up under your skin for the sake of getting up under your skin because I can. And so we're going to listen to that. And I didn't do the whole thing because it actually, as it progresses, you can hear Kellyanne Conway. Actually, you can hear it in her voice. She's offended. She gets upset. Dana Bash then tries to calm the situation down by saying, you didn't hear what you think you just heard. You didn't hear what I said, which, as we all know, in an argument, if the person that has insulted you that you're arguing with tells you didn't hear what you heard, that just makes it worse. So I cut it off before then, but the clip is actually up at the Stacy on the Right Show Facebook page, so you can check it out over there. And additionally, we're going to talk about this woman, Randa Jarrar. She made a huge furor online last week because she was saying horrible things about First Lady Barbara Bush's passing. And she got a lot of attention by saying she made $100,000 a year as a tenured professor and that nothing could change it. And if you didn't like it, whatever, that's what tenure was for. She's since been suspended. And now that they've started digging into her, they found some audio, which is laden with bleeps because she's a very profane and base individual. She's actually talking about how the left, if they want to get attention, if they want to get change, they have to bomb people's homes. They have to down planes. They have to do terroristic acts. I clipped this for you because this is who we're dealing with. And this is the type of people, these are the type of people who are being hired by college administrators all over the country. And so for every one of her, there are 300 or 400 or 500, maybe even 1,000 fantastic, really professional professors, educators, adjunct professors, etc. So in no way am I saying that she's everyone. But there are more and more incidences of us finding these people saying these really, really, like this isn't just a dumb one-off for her. If you read her Twitter stream, which you can't now because she's got it privatized with good reason, or if you listen to this video and understand that she knew she was being videoed and she was on campus when she said these things, then you begin to get an understanding of what we're dealing with. And so as parents, I'm always advocating for us to be active and for us to find out what's going on. And I know there's a whole movement, and I totally understand where it's coming from, where a lot of people are saying, look, parents, you don't need to deal with your kids' professors. You're not supposed to argue with your kids' professors over grades. When your kid's in college, it's their job to interface with their instructors. I agree with that 100%. But it is your job, if you're paying tuition to an institution, to pay attention to their news clips. And if you see someone who's extreme, and I don't mean, because the left tries to associate the word extreme with people on the right, and that is just garbage. But if you're not paying attention to the news clippings, then you don't know that there are instructors on there that are advocating for Marxism and communism, or people that punish students for speech that doesn't adhere to their socialistic, utopian ideals. We can't let that be who we are, to coin a phrase from President Obama. So we're going to talk about that. That's in hour 2 as well. And then Inc. magazine says retirement is dead. We're going to discuss that. And don't get mad. I'm just sharing with you what Inc. magazine has. They say there's a third act that Americans are going to have to get into now that we're living into our 80s and 90s. And then a student lost their life in the most recent Parkland walkouts. They had some protests that the teachers organized and had all of the students participate in. And a 6th grader is now dead. He was killed on the highway. And so I want to talk about what that means for parents of public school students, because again, if you're just thinking that your kid goes to school and, they're staying on the grounds and there's nothing for you to worry about, who knows if these kids are even getting clearance or permission from their parents to participate in these protests. And now that a kid has died, it's time for all of us to sit up and say, wait a minute, I'm not paying my taxes or my private school tuition or whatever the case may be for my kid to be turned into some kind of activist. They're there to learn the basics of education, the building blocks that will basically stand them up to do middle school and then to progress to high school. And as tough as the environment is out there, I'm telling you, the competition is so stiff. For every one of the kids who are out there acting like David Hogg and Gonzalez, advocating for this cause or that, there are 3 or 4 or 5,000 students who have a 4.0 or a 4.2 or a 4.6 and are also all-star for their state, and they're playing a full-time year-round sport. They also play an instrument or two. They speak more than one language. While some of us are letting our kids get swept up in this garbage, kids shouldn't have to worry about politics. That's why they're kids. There are other parents out there who understand the game, and their kids are killing it. And if you want to compete with those kids, your kid can't be out on the highway protesting guns. So we'll talk about that. So now let's circle back around. You heard Kellyanne Conway, or actually the Democrats and the media, clips of them talking about they're trying to distance themselves from this lawsuit because they're like, this is terrible news. And President Trump and others have already said that they're glad the lawsuit was filed, although I think that's probably a little bit of bluster. They're not glad about it, but they can capitalize upon it and use it to their advantage, because during the discovery process, the Democrats will have to provide all of the evidence that they claim supports their suit. And during discovery, things that we've been told don't exist, like the 33,000 deleted emails, the servers that were never hacked, that stuff will have to be made available. So yippee, Christmas in the summer or the fall, whenever it happens. So right now I want to listen to Kellyanne Conway. So she's on the Sunday show on CNN. She's being interviewed by Dana Bash. And they've already discussed a number of things where Dana only wants to talk tweets. Kellyanne Conway wants to talk policy, Pompeo's nomination and confirmation, North Korea, et cetera, et cetera. And then towards the end of the interview, with about 5 minutes left, Dana Bash presents a question to her. She says, I'm sure you've been getting questions about it. Here it is, number 2.
Your husband is a very well-respected lawyer, and he's been sending some tweets that have been critical of the administration. Just an example, in response to a tweet he saw saying President Trump's aides are reluctant to speak for him because he contradicts them later. Your husband wrote, "So true, it's absurd."
He writes a lot of things that are also supportive, and he writes a lot of things about corgis and Philadelphia Eagles and sports, too. But the fact is, well, 2 things I'll say to you. Number one, that, again, that woman who lost the election, whose name I never see on TV anymore, is wrong. That women, I think she said white women, have to listen to their the men in their life to form their own political opinions. Wrong again, lady. Number 2, it's fascinating to me that CNN would go there, but it's very good for the whole world to have just witnessed that it's now that it's now fair game what people's how people's spouses and significant others may differ with them. I'm really surprised, but in some ways relieved and gratified to see that. That should really be fun.
No, I actually, first of all, I would ask you that if you were a man and
no,
your wife
wouldn't.
were 1,000% I would.
No.
And it's not
There's
about that. It's about questioning, publicly questioning what you are doing for a living with regard to your boss. And it has nothing to do with your gender.
No, and it has nothing to do with my spouse. And
right, that's what I'm just asking.
Oh, no. You just brought him into this. So this ought to be fun moving forward, Dana.
Okay.
We're now going to talk about other people's spouses and significant others just because they either work in the White House or at CNN. Are we going to do that? Because you just went there.
Yes.
So it escalates from there. And when I say it escalates, like I've seen Kellyanne Conway in some very tense situations on television before. This one in particular was very interesting because Dana Bash landed one on her in the personal area. And, I've been married for a while. In fact, that was one of the things that Kellyanne Conway and I chatted about the last time I was in DC, and we did the White House Media Row, and she was there and I interviewed her. And afterwards we stood there and she asked me about my husband and the kids. And so we started talking about that. And I asked her about her husband and her kids and how the kids were settling in their different school situations. And she gave me the full update. Like, it was amazing. It was like we were at a mom's coffee and we were getting to know each other. And as we were talking, we had that in common, the kids, the marriage, working moms, that whole thing. And I just, in the moment where Dana Bash asked her that, and you can see as I encourage you to watch it. It's towards the end. If you want to move, if you want to scrub it down to the end, you're going to go till there's about 6 minutes left and watch from there. And I tell you what, you can see the anger building. You know how it is when someone's insulted you. And at first it's like cold water to the face. There's nothing really going on. And then you realize the full scope of what's just been leveled on you. And the reaction is innate. It's not something you can just say, okay, I'm going to get mad about this later. You just start getting ticked off. But then you're either going to lose control or you're not. She chooses not to lose control, but she also hits back pretty hard. And she says, well, it just looks like now it's going to be open season on everybody's spouse. Whoever did what, whoever said what, then let's go. Dana Bash does try to bring up the fact that President Trump attacked one of the spouses of someone else, at some other point said, your spouse, I think it was either not James Comey, whichever one was just Andrew McCabe from the CIA, Andrew McCabe. His wife ran for office and received $500,000 from the Clinton Foundation, and President Trump tweeted about it. But the salient point here is that, let's say my boss or somebody else's boss, if your boss says something about someone else or their spouse, it's not open season for people to then attack your spouse. Is Kellyanne Conway responsible for President Trump's comments or tweets? I don't think so. This was a fascinating interchange. So we have a little bit more of that for you. Howard Kurtz was interviewed about it on Fox News, and we'll listen to that and we'll talk about it some more. If you want to call in, it's 866-963-2037. I'm Stacey Washington here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Stay there.
Preborn is saving babies' lives.
My name is Omaris, and I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant. I felt that if I brought a child to this planet, that I could not take care of it, and I could not be mentally prepared to handle everything that comes with having a child. So I thought my best option was to have an abortion. And once I came to have my ultrasound and I heard his heartbeat, I could not have an abortion.
The Ministry of Preborn saves babies' lives through ultrasounds. When a mother hears her baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound, she'll choose life 80% of the time. To donate and provide for a free ultrasound to help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
This is Mason Weaver, bringing you the truth right between their lies.
This is Mason, and welcome back to the program. I want to tell you something. Unless you are blind, you better understand and recognize what is coming your way, Christians. In my book, Tribalism, I point out the fact that you have to be aware of where you stand with God. You cannot depend on someone else. Today, in your face, your government is putting Christians in jail for being Christian. You are allowed to be discriminated against. You cannot do business with someone that you don't think is faithful to God, and the government will come down on you. At the same time, those ungodly people have access to your very character. They can force you to think, act, and work a certain way. They are telling you in your face, your God is not as powerful as they are. And once again, the Church of God had better stand up and face the reality. You are under social, political, economic attack because you believe in God. They ridicule you. They make fun of you. They make laws against you. At the same time, the ungodly can come into your business and demand to be treated. As a matter of fact, the ungodly can come into your business and demand a job. They can command to be sitting next to you in your business and not agree with you in business. What are you going to do, church? Because God requires a couple of things out of you. You got to decide to please Caesar or please God. Being a Christian is a closed-minded, narrow-minded point of view. Being a Christian is not going to make you popular. You had better be willing to lose your family and everything else. This is Mason. God bless you. See you next time on the Mason, Clarence A. Mason Report.
You have been listening to Mason Weaver. Our email address is clarenceamason@clarenceamason.com. Welcome back to Stacey on the Right.
I know you were watching that live, Howard. Was CNN out of bounds here?
Well, first of all, it was very sort of cringe-inducing to watch. This went on for about 5 minutes. And look, the question by Dana Bash, who's a respected reporter, was designed to embarrass Kellyanne Conway, and it was out of bounds, and here's why. Why should a senior White House official have to answer for what her husband, who's a private lawyer and not really a public figure, is tweeting if he's being critical of the president? Whether Dana Bash would have asked that of a male official or not, aren't spouses entitled to have their own political views?
And Dana Bash defended her questioning of this, saying that it's something that everyone is talking about and everyone is wondering. But then she went on to say it was meant to be a lighthearted moment. So how did Kellyanne Conway, how did she deal with this, do you think?
Well, first of all, when you say everyone is talking about it, we're talking like 500 people in Washington. And yeah, it's good gossip. People say, hey, did you see what Kellyanne's husband tweeted? But as far as the larger question, I think what really made this resonate is the way that Kellyanne Conway, you know, who often goes on CNN and then criticizes CNN's coverage of the president, the way she tried to turn it back on Dana Bash and say, well, if you're going to ask me this, then perhaps the spouses and significant others of all the people who work at CNN should be fair game for scrutiny and criticism. And obviously journalists don't like that. And I don't usually go there unless there are these exceptions where, you know, if a journalist's spouse, if a journalist is covering a governor, a mayor, a city councilman, a president, a candidate, and the spouse directly works for that person, that has to be disclosed, or if there's some financial venture involved that benefits both of them. Otherwise, I think they should be kept separate.
So I agree. Now, there are times when the spouse is going to invariably make news, but that's not the issue here. The issue is that while has this ever happened to you? Because I want to make sure that I'm clear about what I see going on here. There are times when someone cracks a joke and that joke falls flat, but it's kind of clear that they made a joke. And if you know the person their intentions towards you are on the up and up, then you just let it slide and you keep moving. To ask that question with 5 minutes left in the segment means she planned to have a discussion with Kellyanne Conway about her marriage. The fact that she said, I just think it might be uncomfortable. So have you ever been in that situation? Maybe not for a man. If you're a man and you're listening, you're probably not going to commiserate with this. But if you're a woman, you know what I'm talking about. We've all been there. You're having a conversation with a woman and she says, is everything okay at your husband's job? And you're like, yeah, why? What's going on? I just was asking if everything's okay. Now, that woman does not care about you. She would not bring you a meal if you were sick. She is not interested in how you are doing. She's trying to let you know that she's heard that there's something wrong at your husband's job. It could be a complete rumor and innuendo. It could be based on something that is a straight up and up lie and has nothing to do with the truth. But she wants you to know that people are talking about you behind your back and that she is letting you know that she knows about it. That's not someone who cares. So you may have other people characterize that woman as, oh, she's so nice, isn't she? But you know for a fact that she relishes sticking gossip in your face. Now, everyone handles that differently. That's not what this conversation is about. What it's about is that game recognizes game. And I recognize Dana Bash just then was not being Kellyanne Conway's friend, and she wasn't cracking a joke. And so for people who might say, you don't know what she was thinking. Yeah, you're right. I have no idea what was going on in that bobblehead. What I do know is that she took the time to launch a personal attack on Kellyanne Conway, and she never would have done that to a man. So her assertion that this has nothing to do with sex, that I won't even have that conversation. That's what she said. Okay, don't have it. We see you. That's the cake taker here, is that we all see what she tried to do there. And the reason we know she hit it, her punch landed in a soft spot, is that Kellyanne Conway got so upset about it. But who wouldn't? Who wouldn't get upset if you're on a professional interview representing the president and the Trump administration, and the interviewer decides to make it about your marriage? After you've been personally attacked for your looks, for your brain power, for your whatever. Remember, if the left had been on the up and up in their attacks of Kellyanne Conway and kept it strictly to business, we don't agree with what you said. PolitiFact said you lied. You are representing someone that has done X, Y, and Z, and you haven't answered these questions. Those are all fair game. Nobody is going to sit around and, oh my goodness, that's horrible the way you were asked those hard-hitting questions about President Trump's policies on the border. No, do your worst on the policy. But every time you turn around, leftists are launching a personal attack on someone on the right. It's always that the conservative women are either too pretty, they only care about clothes and shoes and their looks, they look like Barbies, they all look like they're from a factory, yada, yada, yada. Or it's that they're not attractive, they're fat, they're this, they're that. They're not intelligent. They must be married to a white man. There must be, insinuations about their personal integrity, their personal female integrity. And so, it's okay. Personal attacks are often recognized for what they are, which is a personal attack. But it's, to me, a little bit different when you have someone like Dana Bash, who everyone says is so well respected. She's a respected journalist. and then she goes on CNN and does something like that. I just don't think it's right. I don't think it's appropriate. And so he says it was a cringe-inducing interview and that it went out of bounds. I agree. He did have a little bit more to say about it. He describes how Conway defended herself. It's number 4.
Kellyanne Conway said, so this ought to be fun moving forward, Dana. You just went there. CNN just went there. And CNN brought a panel on this morning to react to all that. And they were saying that they viewed Kellyanne Conway's response to the question as a threat. Another member of the panel said she was completely out of control.
That suggests that when she's asked this kind of question, she's not entitled to defend herself and punch back. And there is a little bit of a double standard here. I mean, journalists have the view that, you know, we should be able to ask anybody anything we want. But if somebody tries to turn it back on us, well, that's threatening, that's inappropriate. And I don't believe that. You know, if the standard now is that anybody in public life can be asked, what about the fact that your husband, your wife, your family member disagrees with you on something, then that does open up a difficult can of worms that could affect journalists as well. I didn't see Kellyanne Conway as threatening. I did see her as sort of seizing an opportunity to throw this back at the person who was interviewing her.
And she did. And then what happened afterwards, which I didn't pull that audio. I listened to it. I watched it on Mediaite, but I didn't pull it for you because I was really ashamed of Kirsten Powers, who is supposed to be this moderate person who can think on both sides of the aisles, and she's pro-life. And so there have been many times where I have actually applauded her publicly, Kirsten Powers, who now I think she's a CNN contributor, and she's also a columnist. You know, she's a big deal. And there have been times where I've been so appreciative of her perspective, not because I have to agree with someone on everything, but because she presents a very calm, adult, rational perspective on issues that the left tends to not be able to discuss with any clarity, like the pro-life issue. Yet here we are, and Kirsten Powers is saying, yeah, it was like she went on the full bore attack and it was a rational question and she should have just said, I'm not interested in discussing that, yada, yada, yada. Instead, she says, well, it might be fair game to talk about, you know, other spouses then too, when they've been doing it all along. And I totally disagree with her on that. And then the other lady who was on with her, they were on with Allison Camerata, and Allison's kind of talking to them like they're both 5 and they're both CNN contributors. And so they were brought on to pull a hit job on Kellyanne Conway, basically to finish her. Since Dana Bash landed the first punches and knocked her down, they were sent in like the mini bullies, you know, the full bore bully, the big kid comes in and pushes the kid down, stuffs him in a locker or puts their head down the toilet. And then the other kids come in and they're the loser squad. They'd be nothing without that bully. So they don't land the first punch. They don't even pick the victim, but they come in at the end and they throw a few extra kicks. And so that's what they did on CNN afterwards with Allison Camerata. And Allison loves to do that on television. She'll have people on her show to roast another woman. She's supposed to be such a huge feminist. She's supposed to, we respect all ideas and we need more voices. Yet every chance she gets on television, she's up there kicking other women. Now, you may say, well, Kellyanne Conway said it's open season and, you know, you just crossed the Rubicon and so now it's on and she can defend herself, and she can. But is it good form? Is it good journalism, CNN and Allison Camerata and Dana Bash? Is it good journalism for you to attack a woman's marriage live on the air and then bring a little goon squad of many haters on later on to reopen the wounds and kick her around a little bit more? The whole thing to me is disgusting. With the state of marriage in this country where it is, to attack someone's marriage when, from what we can tell, she has a happy marriage. But I guess with leftists, if Hillary Clinton can't be happy, no one can. And so I want to give a little disclaimer on here at this moment because I feel like it's appropriate. It's come to my attention that I guess Christian radio can't be political. And this show is a Christian culture and politics program. And it is on Christian radio because we do inhabit this world. As Christians, politics is a vehicle. It is a tool for executing change and for holding our government accountable. And since we pay taxes, we render unto Caesar that what is Caesar's, we have to manage the government because our money is involved. So while we are not to place politics above obeying God, it is what this program is about. And so we cover a lot of different things, and it's all from the Christian perspective. And as you hear at the disclaimer at the end of every program, the views represented in this program do not represent American Family Radio or Urban Family Talk. They are my views. So, all respect to anyone who's listening, but I am not going to change this program, and I am not going to start kowtowing to Democrats. I am not doing that. And so for every one of those emails where someone's mad because I told the truth about some Democrat on the air, there are 100 other messages of people who are saying, thank God someone out there is telling the truth. And so I respect all views. You can have whatever view you want, but so can I. And so I stand by everything that has been said on this program, and specifically in my comments about these television anchors on the Democratic side. They don't represent the fourth estate. They don't represent good, neutral journalism or investigative journalism. They represent the Democrats. And I don't support the Democrats because they support abortion, and they support open borders, and they support lawlessness, and they support sexual education that glorifies masturbation and rape and sex between same-sex people for children. That's what the Democrats are all about. And because of that, and because those things go against God's word, I oppose the Democrats. That's not going to change. Emails will not change it. Hurt feelings won't change it. There's no changing it. I tell you what, if you get on your knees and you think for a few seconds, Lord, let me be real with you. And then you tell God how you feel about these things and ask him to illuminate your mind and speak to you about whether or not you are supporting the right things, whether your life is ordered in his word, whether you can be comforted in knowing that you're pleasing him with your votes. Ask him. You don't need my approval, and you're not going to get it if you're going for the Democrats. But what you can do is ask him and then let him talk to you about it, and then you go from there. And you don't have to let me know what you're doing because I'm not worried about you. That's the thing here. Every one of us is tasked with accepting God or denying him. He gives us free will to do that. And then if we accept him, to walk with him and let him change us, let him sanctify us, let him bring us into truth and wisdom. And if you're not doing that, I wonder how you think you can lecture me on anything. I just wonder, where does that begin? Where do you get to come at me with your unbiblical self about anything? Because if you send me something, I'm just going to check it. I'm going to figure out, is this right? And I'm not looking for someone else's opinion. I'm not going to go on Twitter and find out who the next conservative rock star is and see what her TL says about how I feel about something. I'm not going to moveon.org or GOP.org or any of these other earthly sources to figure out where my views should line up. And you shouldn't either. So if you don't like what I'm saying about the Democrats and you think it sounds horrible, stop associating with them. There are other options for you. And that's all I have to say about it. So now we have just a little smidgen here. And I want to talk about this Parkland student that lost their life walking out for this protest. Notice this isn't headlining the news. Remember when everything in the world was about the Parkland students? They were on every channel and we couldn't get away from them. But now that someone's died, we can't hear from them. We're talking about a kid who's 11 or 12 years old. So here's how it happened. ABC 7 News said, actually, it's not ABC 7 News. It's El Paso, Texas. This happened on Loop 375 at the Beaumark off-ramp. You have 11-year-old Jonathan Benko of El Paso. He's hit by a 2010 Ford F-150 truck that's blue in color. And what happened to him? There was a walkout at Parkland Middle School. Jonathan Benko walked out with the students, but a group of them, including Jonathan, decided to take the chance to cross. They were basically, we're outside already. We're going to skip school. Remember, these are kids. They crossed Loop 375 west from south to north without being hit. Then the kids thought better of it and crossed back over, and Jonathan crossed last and was hit by the truck and died after he was taken to the hospital. He went to University Medical Center and died. The driver of the truck, Jesus Diaz, was not injured and remained at the scene, and there were no other children who were injured. So after he was killed, parents start showing up at the school to pick up their kids. But my question is, why are children in the middle of the day walking out near a highway to protest guns? Why are middle school kids being politicized by Democrats to get votes in November? Now we have a dead child, a family that's been devastated, and a school building that has experienced a tragedy. And for what? Have any other lives been saved? I don't think so. But that's not the point, is it? It's about votes and Democrats. We'll be back with more after these messages.
I just thank God for the Holy Ghost. If you will let him, he really will teach you all things. Have you ever made an excuse to someone why you were unable to do something or why you couldn't attend a certain event instead of just being honest and telling them you just were not interested? I think many of us have. Well, that's lying. Proverbs chapter 12 verse 17 says, an honest witness tells the truth. A false witness tells lies. Proverbs chapter 11 verse 1 in one translation says, dishonesty in business disgusts the eternal. It disgusts God, but fair dealing delights him. False witness utters lies. Be faithful and consistent with being honest with others. Stop with the excuses and be truthful. There is freedom when our integrity and character reflects our Savior Jesus Christ. What seems little to us are big to him. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Victory McIntosh. Connect with us more at urbanfamilytalk.com.
It's time to call your senators. We need to tell them to put an end to the liberals' filibuster, switch to a majority vote, and defund Planned Parenthood. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Senators respond to constituent calls. So call 202-224-3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference.
God is looking for growling spiritual stomachs.
Dr. Tony Evans says that's when the Lord satisfies our hunger and transforms our reality.
Much of what God wants to do to us and with us, he can't get to because we are too full already.
Discover what the Lord can bring to us when all we bring to him is nothing, as we take a look at how God fills up empty people this week on The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans.
Stacey Washington.
And so to this day, I don't eat green beans. If they bring me a plate of food at a restaurant and they've substituted green beans for some other vegetable because the other vegetable is out of season, I will make them bring me a saucer and remove the green beans from my plate and take them off of the table because I cannot abide green beans. And so Chuck Schumer and the Democrats have to sit down to the table and it's loaded up high with green beans and they have to stay there until they've eaten them all. That's the table they set. They boiled the green beans, they picked them, they snapped them, they put them into the steamer, they've cooked them, they seasoned them with salt and pepper, and now they're on the table with a little side of butter, and that's all they're getting, and they're going to have to eat these until they win.
Stacey on the Right. Weekday afternoons at 2 Central on Urban Family Talk. This is Stacey on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
We certainly hope that some members will change their minds. Look, at some point, Democrats have to decide whether they love this country more than they hate this president. And they have to decide that they want to put the safety and the security and the diplomacy of our country ahead of their own political games. And we're very hopeful that they will. Mike Pompeo is a highly qualified individual, top of his class at Harvard, first in his class at West Point. He's been an impeccable CIA director. He's done a great job. He was confirmed there. And if you just look at history, the past Secretary of States have been confirmed unanimously.
Right.
And Republicans have come on board and supported Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, people we know who they didn't necessarily agree with on the political spectrum, but they knew how important this position was, and they didn't play games with it. And Democrats need to do the same thing with Mike Pompeo and confirm him. He's been one of the leading people when it comes to the negotiations and the conversations with North Korea.
Absolutely.
And to stop that would be incredibly dangerous and damaging for our country and for the world.
So here's the big deal there. And she makes some excellent points. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, White House press secretary, and she was on Fox and Friends and they're trying to figure out like what is going on here. And she just completely eviscerated the Democrats there for their partisanship. They just don't want Mike Pompeo to be Secretary of State. And their excuse is, well, when he, you know, that other job was just like a regular job, but this is a diplomatic job. Well, he's already met with Kim Jong-un. So, I mean, he's already doing diplomacy. So what now? Like what is the reason why they just can't? Do you think the Republican members didn't have a problem with Loretta Lynch? You think they didn't have a problem with Eric Holder? Just look back at Hillary Clinton. You think back then, knowing who she was, they couldn't foresee that there'd be problems with her, yet they voted to confirm her because it is the president's purview to choose these people? You know, I don't understand it. But again, double standards galore. So I want to give you a little bit more on this story about this poor child who was killed. And for those of you who are fixing your mouths up to say, well, he chose to cross the highway and he, you know, yeah, he did. But why was he outside? Please help me understand why a public school kid was outside during the middle of the day protesting guns. Oh, I'm sorry. Because his teachers took him out there. So I read you the news release from the EPPD Public Affairs Office, the El Paso Police Department, Public Affairs Department. Well, they had a piece over at KVIA.com, which is one of their local news channels. And they interviewed some of the people at the school after it was found out that the little boy had been killed. And they said, they were asking, you know, what kind of coverage did you have for the students? Who was there to make sure that kids didn't get away, didn't run off by themselves, whatever? And they said that the administration actually added extra staff to cover the event, and they were covering the front and the back of the building. But the group of 12 to 15 kids, of which Jonathan was one, they snuck off on their own and took off over the highway. So obviously they knew they couldn't leave out the front or the back, so they went over the highway. And then after they got back from the protest, Garcia, which is one of the teachers there, said, I walked into my classroom for about 5 minutes and my teacher actually banged his hands on the table and said, and screamed out, someone got hit, and ran out of the classroom crying. And then a teacher named Ramirez said, it's sad because they are from Parkland and we care about our students. I just started bawling my eyes out, just not knowing who it was. I felt that because I saw a couple of kids I knew jumped over. I thought that it was them. And so I started crying and we all felt the pain. So she saw students jump over the highway, and I guess she was like, well, let's just go back to class. I think the kids are kind of young to be protesting outside, said Teresa Garcia. As students gathered for a candlelight vigil, Garcia put the incident into perspective for many by saying, life is precious. Some people's life just got cut short. We have to live like this is going to be our last day on earth. Well, I guess if your kid's in public school, maybe so. Because public school teachers are going to take your kids out and let them run across the highway so they can protest guns. I mean, that is some salacious garbage right there. Like, if you are a parent and you have kids in public school, I'm sorry, you got to be on the horn. You have to tell them in writing. You have to send a letter over on letterhead and CC your attorney and let them know, if you take my child outside of the school building for a protest, I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue your boss. I'm going to sue the school district. I'm going to sue you publicly and privately. I'm going to sue the district's attorneys. Everybody in the entire school district is going to be receiving blue notifications from my attorney if you take my child out of the school building to attend a protest. And until parents start doing that, until they start showing up at school board meetings and standing up and saying, I live at so-and-so and my name is, and I refuse to allow my child to leave the school building to go to a protest of any kind, until parents start doing that, this is just a shot across the bow. Because they care more about protesting than they care about your kids. They care more about their politics than they care about your kids. So if you're a good teacher out there and you would never let this happen, please consider yourself not a part of that criticism I just leveled. But if you are someone who is currently making a Facebook group so you can get some kids to go out and protest guns, I'm talking to you. Which is more important? That these kids get an education and get to live out their lives on their own, or that you get to say you organized a protest, that you get to go outside and put your little angry hand up in the air about the NRA? Which is more important? People have been tweeting over the past few days since the Waffle House shooting, which was yesterday, been tweeting, actually it was the day before. So how many kids has the NRA killed today? I don't know, but we know how many the gun lobby has, the gun protesters have killed. One. The gun protesters have killed one child. How many more? How many more? So speaking of guns, something else that blew up in the Democrats' faces over the weekend is actually over last week, because this came out, I guess, on earlier in the week, but it's just now hitting the news, not hitting local news. Before we get into it, it's the CDC study saying that guns save lives. Oh, we have a caller. Let's go to Joe in New Mexico. Joe, thanks for calling Stacey on the Right.
Hello, thank you.
Hello.
Yes. Just wanted to make a comment on this little boy that was ran over.
Mm-hmm.
My youngest son, who's a senior in high school, sent me the text about it and let me know what was going on. And it got me thinking, these children should not be out there protesting. What it should be is they should voice their opinion to their parents and have their parents kind of talk them over and stuff and let them know what's going on. The schools shouldn't be out there promoting protesting or anything. They should just promote better education and prepare these kids for a better future and guide them into be better politicians and stuff, and hopefully one day become leaders in the country, and then from there they can make their opinion. But right now it should not be these children. They should not be out of school protesting or anything.
I agree. And I think you probably have just articulated what most parents think. I'm interested in what my kids think about different news articles and issues of the day, but I'm not interested in them engaging in activism because they're kids and they have their whole lives to do that. But right now, while they're kids, why can't they just be carefree and choose to see the news or not choose to see the news? Kids don't actually have to watch the news and be informed about what's going on with politics. And I just think it's crazy that that's what they're doing with these kids. Thank you so much for calling the show and for sharing that as a parent. And you know, I'm hoping that parents are going to stand up and get out there and make their opinions known about this. Don't let your kid be a part of a protest. It's just not appropriate. So we were talking about this poor child who lost their life for a gun protest, and then you've got the CDC issuing this study. Now, this is a comprehensive study that the CDC has been doing, tracking the use of defensive gun use, DGU. That's the acronym for it. And so what they do is they track how many times a year a person will use a gun in self-defense. So this started back in the 1990s. And the question asked was, how often do innocent Americans use guns in self-defense? And how does that compare to the harms guns can cause in the hands of violent criminals? So Florida State University criminologist Gary Kleck conducted the most thorough previously known survey data on the question in the 1990s. His study, which has been harshly disputed by pro-gun control quarters, indicated that there are more than 2.2 million such defensive uses of guns, or DGUs, in America every year. Now, CLEC has unearthed some lost CDC survey data on the question, and the CDC essentially confirmed CLEC's results. But CLEC didn't know about that until now because the CDC never reported what it found. And what was found? Well, the final adjusted prevalence of 1.24% therefore implies that an average year, in any average year, during 1996 to 1998, which is the time frame covered, but they also have estimates for 1995 and other years, 2.46 million U.S. adults used a gun for self-defense. That estimate is based upon an enormous sample of 12,000. I'm sorry. Let me correct that. That estimate is based upon an enormous sample of 12,870 cases in a nationally representative sample, which strongly confirms the 2.5 million past 12-month estimate obtained by CLEC and Gertz. The CDC's results then imply that guns were used defensively by victims about 3.6 times as often as they were used offensively by criminals. Now, defensive gun use does not mean that someone was shot. Defensive gun use can be as simple as you're being held up, you're being carjacked, whatever. You pull the gun out and you say, "Leave me alone." Or you just pull the gun out and the perpetrator runs away. Or you use the gun and another person who's nearby puts the other person on the ground in a headlock or puts their foot on their neck or whatever and holds them there until 911 can be called and the police can arrive. So no one has to be shot in order for it to be a defensive gun use. And I would imagine that most people would be extraordinarily grateful not to have to kill someone in order to not have their life or their car or their child taken or what have you. So guns are used defensively by victims 3.6 times as often as they're used offensively by criminals. So the story that sticks out in my mind that I like to use because it's one that is very easy for us to kind of imagine ourselves in this situation is the year before last, I believe it was, you have this guy in the McDonald's and he's there with his two daughters and they're sitting in the booth and they're eating. And then he's minding his own business, this guy, and a gentleman walks in, a robber. He has a gun and he starts sticking everybody up in the restaurant. He says, "Everybody take your purses and wallets out. I'm robbing you all." He walks up to the counter. He says, "Empty the cash register." The little people behind the cash register are like deer in the headlights. They don't know what to do. He's sticking the joint up. He turns to the dad with the two kids in the seat. He says, "What are you looking at? Get your wallet out. Take that watch off. You're giving me what you have." And turns back to the counter. And when he does, the dad reaches back as if for his wallet, pulls his gun out, and shoots the robber. That's defensive gun use. That happens 3.6 times as often as the robbers actually go for and actually can, shoot people. If you don't believe me, just go to liveleak.com or YouTube and type it in. I don't know if YouTube scrubbed them all by now because they've been taking off gun content. You'll see the videos of it's closed camera footage. You can find it on Facebook too, of people in the store. Someone comes in with a gun and other people in the vicinity pull their guns out and shoot the robber. Sometimes the robber will get shot and stumble out into the parking lot and try to escape. So, I mean, why is this so controversial? I've been saying this for years. I know my father's in law enforcement. He would tell us all the time about incidences where somebody tried to, roll up on somebody that they thought was going to be their victim, and they met up with cold, hard steel, the truth, as my dad liked to call it. This happens a lot. So why don't we see these people on the Today Show every single day? Why is it only the NRA and the United States Concealed Carry Association and other organizations like that cover this information? I'll tell you why. Because if Americans knew how often guns were used for self-defense, they would stop talking about gun control and they'd start talking about mental health and holding politicians like Sheriff Israel and other government officials accountable. Teachers at that school where that kid got killed, somebody should be arrested. Someone should be held accountable for the loss of that child's life. Will they? Of course not. because they're too busy tweeting about NRA members killing children while they're actually killing the children. It's unbelievable. All right, when we get back, we're going to have hour 2 of Stacey on the Right. Stay here for One News Now and their important interviews, news, and information. We'll be right back.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
As millennials, we have more than $1 trillion in purchasing power, so you know businesses are watching us. But millennials are losing our faith, so we know Satan is watching us. Engage Magazine is for millennials by millennials, and it speaks to faith, purpose, and a closer walk with Jesus. Because above all, God is watching us. Visit engagemagazine.net and listen Saturday afternoons at 5:30 Central on AFR.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News on the Hour, I'm Chris Woodward. Happening right now, authorities in Toronto are investigating an incident involving a van and pedestrians. At least 8 people were hit by the van after police say the driver jumped the curb and hit the pedestrians. One witness says she saw multiple people laying on the ground.
So many people just shouting, stop the car, but he didn't. He just kept moving, and he hit some people.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told reporters this afternoon that, quote, our hearts go out to anyone affected. Meanwhile, Fox's Catherine Herridge has more on the scene in question.
This is a very congested part of the cities because it's also a major hub for the Toronto subway system that's known as the TTC. The other thing about this area is that it's kind of a mixed commercial as well as residential area. So you have businesses, but you also have high-rise condos, and then about 2 or 3 streets away from Yonge Street, so the main artery, you have a number of old residential neighborhoods. So this is a heavily congested area, in part because of the roads involved, also with the impact of the subway system. This white vans typically are rental vans, the white van running along the sidewalk, taking down a number of pedestrians.
More on this developing story at onenewsnow.com. Authorities say the suspect in a quadruple homicide at a Waffle House in Nashville has been arrested. Metropolitan Nashville Police announced on Twitter that 29-year-old Travis Reinking was taken into custody Monday. He was arrested not far from his apartment. Photos posted by police in Nashville showed him clothed and in a police car. Law enforcement officers from multiple agencies had mounted a massive manhunt following the slings early Sunday. 2 Florida sheriff's deputies were gunned down in a Gilchrist County restaurant last week. It was the 21st and 22nd police shootings this year. AFN Steve Jordahl has more.
Sergeant Noel Ramirez was a 7-year veteran of the Gilchrist County Sheriff's Department. He leaves behind a wife and children. 25-year-old Taylor Lindsay had already logged 3 years with the department. The assassin walked into a restaurant where the two were having lunch and shot them. He later killed himself, leaving authorities searching for a motive. Sheriff Bobby Schultz says the anti-law enforcement climate in many sectors of society certainly did not help.
What do you expect happens when you demonize law enforcement to the extent that it's been demonized? Every type of hate, every type of put down that you can think of. The only thing these men were guilty of was wanting to protect you and me.
According to the Officer Down Memorial page, 22 officers have been shot in the line of duty in 2018, more than twice the next leading cause of death among officers, automobile crashes. Randy Sutton is with Blue Lives Matter.
People don't believe that there's a war on cops. The war on cops is very real. The 2 casualties of yesterday are just another example.
And he says it's a symptom of a larger problem in our culture.
When people are targeted, whether it be for reasons of their skin color, of their ethnicity, of their religion, or of the uniform that they wear, this shows a deep, deep issue that is facing this country, and we have to confront it.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
Americans overwhelmingly believe teachers do not make enough money, and half say they'd support paying higher taxes to give educators a raise. That's according to a new poll from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research that comes amid recent teacher strikes over low pay. The poll found that parents and those without children are about as likely to think teachers are paid too little. In final news this hour, it's not young people who are drinking more these days. Fox's Joy Piazza has more in House Call for Health.
It's the baby boom generation, folks in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Researchers say they're seeing a steady increase in alcohol use and even binge drinking. Doctors say the heavier liquor load is causing side effects in older Americans, some of whom have convinced themselves that moderate drinking is actually good for you. Federal guidelines say anything more than 2 drinks a day for men and 1 for women is too much.
For more news and information, visit onenewsnow.com.
Lonnie Poindexter.
Don't ever ask God for patience. Just say, oh, Lord, help me to be more patient. No, don't do that. Well, why, Lonnie? Why shouldn't I do that? He'll give it to you, but you're not going to like how you get it. Well, Lonnie, what do you mean? How do you get patience? Trials and tribulations, my brethren. That's how you get it.
Lion Chasers. Weekday mornings at 10 Central on Urban Family Talk. Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
Here's what they're looking at. Here's one of the 7 memos that Comey had. He wrote it. His name's at the top. And it says classified by director. And then it says classification secret, which is the second level. The moment Comey took this out of the FBI building and took it home with him, he is arguably committing a crime, mishandling of classified information. And if he gave this document to somebody else unauthorized, Daniel Richman, and one other person that I'm aware of, and that'll be coming out, he committed yet another crime. And by the way, he can't say, well, I redacted parts of it. The content, not the labeling, dictates classification under the law.
Okay, so, you know, it's getting kind of exhausting, but the referrals by, the members of Congress, they referred a number of individuals for investigation and by the Department of Justice, and this thing is just rolling on. And we really need to start placing pressure by calling our congressmen, especially the senators, to put pressure on Mueller to complete the investigation. The Democrats, of course, would love to see this investigation move into to continue on into the actual midterms, because they could use it as something to deflect away from. Right now, they don't know what to do. That's why you see this attack, this lawsuit filed by the DNC. They just don't know what to run on. Americans are happy with the tax reform. Most Americans want to see more. Like, what else can the Republicans do? Americans don't like the way the president is being treated or portrayed. Even people who are on the left see that there's a certain witch hunt quality to it that does not bode well for our interactions as Americans. And remember, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. When the Democrats are in charge again, so it'll be impeachment from day one. And who's to say what will happen at the FBI and the DOJ? If those areas can't be completely cleaned up, we can expect more corruption. And this is not what we want as Americans. So it's interesting to hear just this discussion going on about, again, the violation of the Records Act. And so you've got these memos that James Comey created after he met with someone, and the meeting between him and the president, he's the director of the FBI, he's meeting with the president of the United States, which that's the highest security clearance you can get in this country. Whatever they talked about in the confines of that meeting that he wrote a memo about, that would be at minimum classified. So if he forwarded the memo to his friend, who is now saying is his attorney because he wants to protect those communications, if he forwarded it to his Columbia law professor friend, at that time, he's sharing information that at minimum, the memos should have been reviewed for their sensitivity to ascertain whether or not they could be shared outside this classified silo, the silo of people who maintain the clearances to be able to look at and read, say, the memos of the director of the FBI. Now, I'm not friends with James Comey, and I used to hold a secret security clearance. Again, it's second from the bottom. You're not even really killing anything right there with a secret clearance, but it gives you access to some things. So as someone who previously held the clearance, I could probably hold it again. I could withstand the scrutiny of the FBI and pass a clearance at this time. Should he have forwarded the emails to me? What about the reporter who received them? In other words, if the lawyer that he sent them to never even held the security clearance, I would actually be a better candidate for seeing the classified memos, except, oh, wait, I don't currently hold that clearance. So it's not like you used to rent this apartment and you used to have a key. And so 10 years later, because you used to rent it, you can try to come in and, when the person who's renting the apartment now comes home, they can come in. And if you're there, they can't say anything about it. No, that's not how it works. And that's not how it works with classified material either. So someone who used to hold the clearance can't see the memos. How can someone who does not have a clearance and was never cleared for one see the memos? So the very thing that James Comey let Hillary Clinton off the hook for, mishandling of classified documents, he is now guilty of himself. The irony there is pretty rich. But if you think about that for just 5 seconds, let it sit in your brain for a second, let it marinate around. Can you now see why Dana Bash wants to talk about Kellyanne Conway's marriage? Why does that suddenly make total sense? Because she'd rather talk about Kellyanne Conway's marriage and insinuate there are problems there than actually deal with the fact that James Comey, erstwhile sometimes hero of the left, is actually guilty of the same stuff Hillary Clinton's guilty of. Yet they're both running around, sitting in the back of town cars and limos and Mercedes-Benzes, living their lives. And you got other people like that sailor who was just pardoned by the president who actually did jail time for much, much less. So that's why the DNC is suing the Trump administration and WikiLeaks. It's not because there's been any collusion. It's because they've got nothing to stand on going into 2018. And of course, I mean, if you want to talk about the president's tweets all day, then you're going to have plenty of fodder there to discuss because he's not going to stop tweeting and it's not going to, the tone of the tweets is not going to change. But if you want to talk about actual laws being broken, you need only just turn your head to the left. That's where it's at. So now I want to get into, and by the way, welcome to the show here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. We are actually going to be speaking with Mattie Duppler. She's the founder and president of Forward Strategies, senior fellow at the National Taxpayers Union, and former coalitions director for the House Republican Conference. We're going to talk to her a little bit. But I wanted to get to, and this story is just, it's kind of crazy. Like it's not kind of, it's totally crazy pants. And I covered it just a smidge. I just mentioned it a couple of weeks ago on the program. The New Yorker, you guys might remember me mentioning this. The New Yorker has been taking it on the chin for an essay that they had published. It was an op-ed, Chick-fil-A's infiltration of New York City. And most of the piece is about the evils of fast food, which, I mean, you can't argue with it, except I would dare say that Chick-fil-A, even though the chicken is fried, or if you get the unfried option, the grilled option, is still healthier than your McDonald's, depending on what you're getting. But it's high-calorie food and it's fast food. And if you're going to talk about Chick-fil-A, you're talking about all of it. Hardee's, Arby's, McDonald's, all of it. So I just find it funny that it's only Chick-fil-A that's really going to hurt you. No, that's not it. So in the essay, here's the quote that has got everybody kind of wondering, what is going on in New York? The brand's arrival here feels like an infiltration, in no small part because of its pervasive Christian traditionalism. Its headquarters in Atlanta are adorned with Bible verses and statues of Jesus washing disciples' feet. Its stores close on Sunday. The restaurant's corporate purpose still begins with the words to glorify God. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, so what? It's a private company. Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing too. Like, does anybody go to Google and find out what they've got going on in their headquarters? Nobody has a problem with it because it's totally secular. But all of a sudden in America, if your company is run with Christian ethos, it's like, oh my goodness, stop the presses. We can't have any Chick-fil-A's in New York. They call it an infiltration of New York City. So Nate Silver of 538 tweeted that this is why Trump won. But there's a deeper problem. And this piece is by Stephen L. Carter. And it's fantastic. I mean, it's a total breakdown. And I got to give you this because I found it ironic that I was reading it. Actually, Jason Riley, he's a columnist over at the Washington Post, and he forwarded this over and I was reading it and thinking, it's just stunning. So let me get to it. This is a 2015 Pew Research Center study of race and ethnicity among U.S. religions. Tells us that if you're mocking Christians, as this writer was, you're mostly mocking women because women are more likely than men to be Christians. The greatest disproportion is found among Black Christians, where 41% of the Christians are men. So if you're mocking Black Christians, you're mocking Black women in particular. Now, why is this important? Do I believe that one ethnicity of Christian is more important than the other? No. But this is the way that you throw this stuff back in the face of liberals, because liberals don't like Christianity. I'm not talking about the ones who are actual Christians. I'm talking about the ones who they're faux Christians, the Christians in name only, the ones who believe that Chick-fil-A shouldn't exist in New York City because Chick-fil-A is a Christian company. So you won't find many Christians who believe that, but you'll find plenty of people who are not Christians who say they're not atheists. They say they don't have anything against Christians, but they write stories like this and they read them and they applaud them. So you've got, I was reading it with my mouth open. I couldn't even get my coffee down when I was reading the story. Some 83% of all Black Americans are absolutely certain that God exists. No other group comes close to this figure. Black Christians are far more likely than white Christians, 84 to 64%, to describe religion as very important in their lives. Of all ethnic groups, Black Christians are the most likely to attend services, pray frequently, and read the Bible regularly. They are also, here's the kicker, most likely to believe that their faith is the place to look for answers to questions about right and wrong. They are by large margins the most likely to believe that the Bible is the literally inerrant word of God. Woo, woo, because that's the truth. That's what it is. In short, if you find Christian traditionalism creepy, it's Black people that you're talking about. Now, why is this important? Because this writer, I bet you anything, if you go to that writer who wrote the piece in the New Yorker saying that Chick-fil-A shouldn't come to town, they'll be the first ones to tell you that they're down with the struggle. They're allies of not just Black people, but gays and LGBT and trans. They've already got all of their little bumper stickers and their buttons and their safety pins, and they are down for the struggle, except for Christianity, which it turns out, if you're talking about Christians, you're talking about Black folk. So here's a table on here that I'm going to describe to you. Well, first, let me get a little bit more details about what these people believe. Politically, Black Americans are overwhelmingly Democrats. That's true of Black Christians as well. On the other hand, Black Christians tend to be socially conservative, the least tolerant of homosexuality, the most likely to oppose same-sex marriage, the least likely to believe in evolution. If you're maligning traditional Christianity, the people you're maligning are disproportionately Black. Then in the table, it describes something about the future. The figures on the young show that 9% of white Christians are young millennials, compared with 21% of Asian Christians, 16% of Latino Christians, and 17% of white Christians. 17% of white Christians are from the so-called silent generation. No other group comes close. So in other words, white Christians are aging. Christians of color are getting younger. So even as the U.S. and Europe see the growth of atheism and agnosticism, religious faith in general, and Christianity in particular continue to explode in parts of the world that aren't as white. That's why the Vatican, for example, sees developing nations as the future of the Catholic Church. Around the globe, the people most likely to be Christians are women of color. The last point from the Pew study is also illuminating. Among Latinos and Asians, Christians are overwhelmingly first-generation immigrants. The actual numbers are staggering. Only 3% of white Christians are first-generation immigrants, comparing with 10% of Black Christians, 58% of Latino Christians, and 66% of Asian Christians. In other words, American Christianity is growing heavily through immigrants who are people of color. If Christians are really so scary, maybe it's time to build that wall. This is what this writer is saying to these liberals. So he goes on to say that he believes in free speech. He thinks the New Yorker can publish articles or columns from whoever they want. He doesn't believe that any group is placed beyond criticism or mockery. So you can be upset about Chick-fil-A coming to town. That's your purview. Don't eat the chicken. That's what I said last week. But if if it's your intention to mock Christians, you need to know who comprises that demographic. It's people who look a lot like me. So this man is not saying by any means that there aren't white Christians in America, but he's talking about the demographic changes that are occurring in this country, and he's making a point. And the point is that every time liberals fix their mouths to try to tear down God and Christianity, they don't know what they're talking about. They can't even get a regular run-of-the-mill negative hit right on Christians. Not only is the faith growing around the world, but here in this country, the people who are holding it down, percentage-wise, are minorities. So that just leaves us all a lot of work to do. Being kind to each other, banishing the enmity that's in our hearts, worshiping God, loving each other. That's what we have to do, which includes loving this person who wrote this article about the chicken. I'm sorry, I'm going to love you for the sake of Jesus Christ, but for the sake of the chicken, I don't understand you. I just don't understand you. How could you not like Chick-fil-A? All right, when we get back, we'll have Mattie Duppler. Stay there. Stacey on the Right.
Did you know George Washington, the father of our country, he loved being at home at Mount Vernon. In fact, he said he'd rather be at home at Mount Vernon than dining with all the princes and royalty of Europe. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We're going to Mount Vernon on our Spiritual Heritage Tour in September, and we'd love to have you join us for this very special time. Stephen McDowell of the Providence Foundation will be with us as we go all over our nation's capital. We'll go to the Capitol, the Library of Congress, the World War II Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, all the places you want to see in our nation's capital. We'll see that, but we'll also go to Mount Vernon. Now, for all the information on this September tour, including a side trip to Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, you can check it out at spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com for all the information on our September tours. And we'll see you then.
Hello, this is Bishop Harry Jackson of Hope Christian Church in Beltsville, Maryland. Jesus said you would do greater works than he did. Jonah 2:7-8. Jonah chapter 2:7-8 in the NIV version says this: those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. They forfeit the grace that could be theirs. In other words, there is a reservation, there is a confirmation number, there is a credit card on file, but you don't check in. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit, they don't activate that reservation and its privileges that have already been paid for. Come on now. They forfeit, in one translation, it says they forfeit the hesed. That word is the loving kindness, the tender mercies of God. They forfeit the unmerited favor. They forfeit that which Jesus paid for, that has no requirement of your payment, no ability for you to pay for it. You're like a homeless man that could be staying tonight in the Marriott with all the food taken care of, but you won't show up if you cling to worthless idols. Join us this Sunday morning at 6251 Avondale Road in Beltsville, or on the web at thehopeconnection.org.
Welcome back to Stacey on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome back to the program. It's good to be with you today. It's Monday. Good weekend. I spent part of that weekend literally dismantling a cinder block wall here at our house. It's a retaining wall / privacy wall that looks terrible. And so, yes, I was out there with a shovel, and I didn't use a sledgehammer. I'm not going to lie, I didn't use it. But the wheelbarrow, I was throwing the big pieces of wall into the huge dumpster. I mean, it was so real. It was so DIY over here. And I was participating. I was totally into it. All right. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome Mattie Duppler, founder and president of Forward Strategies, senior fellow at the National Taxpayers Union. Mattie, thanks so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stacey.
So let's talk about the midterm election and all of that good jazz. We've got the midterms are coming up, and the Democrats have obviously not a lot to run on this time. And so they got the DNC suing the Trump campaign and WikiLeaks. And we've got a lot of the Democrats talking about whether or not Kellyanne Conway's husband tweets about the president negatively or whether their marriage is good. And I'm trying to think of what else they've got. The gun control angle is not flying the way that they'd like it to. In fact, you have this 11-year-old kid who was just killed in El Paso during one of their gun walkouts. What are they running on? What are they going to use?
So here's the thing. I think going into November, it is very simple for both sides. As you've laid out, Democrats don't have a positive vision to lay out for the country. So if they're trying to tell Americans, you should give us control of Congress so we can act as a balance to President Trump, and if they're going to try to use that as some kind of bellwether for what comes then in the next presidential, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that vision is that they're trying to get Americans to be on board with. But for Republicans, it is equally as simple. Republicans have been very clear about what their vision is for the country. And this started last year with House Republicans starting to put together a consensus position on big topics that Americans care about. That's national security, that's regulation, that's tax reform. And then we saw once we had a Republican in the White House how easy it was for him to be able to enact some of those initiatives. The Trump administration has been able to deregulate at the speed of one regulation put into law equal to 22 regulations taken out of law. I mean, that is an incredible step forward in decreasing the regulatory burden here in the United States. But obviously, the number one platform that every single Republican should be talking about going into November is tax reform. And there's a couple different reasons for that. One is because it's an actual policy victory, and it's very consistent with how Republicans have talked about economic policy for quite some time. Tax reform in and of itself wasn't a super new idea, even though Republicans in Congress had put a lot of thought into what the tax reform plan would look like. We knew that Republicans, starting with Ronald Reagan and even before him, but for the last 30 years, doing something to reform our broken tax system has been something that Republicans have consistently identified as one of the biggest barriers to growth. So now that we have tax reform passed into law, we have actual effects that are happening that Americans are seeing in their own pocketbooks, in their businesses, and in their households. And that's extremely important. For so long, Republicans and conservatives have talked about pro-growth policy and about how important it is without having the benefit of actual law and actual impacts for people to feel that. It's always been a very kind of green eye shades argument for those of us here in Washington talking about why these policies work. We now have the opportunity to say, your circumstances are better today than they were yesterday and than they were the year before, and it's because of this policy we put into place. And I think there's been a very easy trend to kind of follow this year. You saw in the beginning of the year, the tax bill, of course, passed in December, right? So in the beginning of this year, the tax bill was beginning to be implemented. But even before the IRS had changed all the withholding tables and it had really been executed into law, we saw announcements from companies enacting tax reform bonuses and giving out, cash or expanding benefits or expanding some kind of programming for their employees as a result of tax reform. These companies were saying it was a result of tax reform. After that, we saw utility companies talking about how their rates were going to be lower because of tax reform. So it was a real-world consequence that the average American who saw a bonus check in the mail, who saw their utility rates drop, could connect the dots between an impact they were feeling in their household and what Republicans in Congress had done and what the Trump administration had signed into law the previous year. Moving forward in the year, in February, the IRS withholding tables changed, which means that the average American all of a sudden saw their paycheck automatically rise. So this started, end of January, beginning of February, your paycheck every 2 weeks or every month all of a sudden was bigger. And that is obviously a huge impact for every American who comes home at the end of the day and is trying to make their budget balance. Having that little extra cash they get to bring home with them is an obviously an impactful real-world consequence that Americans are feeling across this country. And, we've seen a lot of really great stories from people about what they're doing with that extra money. And we have heard a lot in the last couple of years about how Americans feel that their incomes have stagnated, that they haven't been able to save because they're living paycheck to paycheck. Being able to keep more of their paycheck obviously contributes to having more financial stability, which clearly contributes to better economic success across the country. And so now we're moving into the second quarter of the year after these tax cuts have gone into law. And I would argue we're going to see even more real-world consequences that Americans will be feeling even more deeply, because we're going to see business behavior start to change as a result of all of the tax changes in law on the business side of the code. So the reduction of the corporate tax rate, of course, is one of the most important things that happened last year. Taking the corporate income tax rate from 35% down to 21% is a huge boon for growth. But couple that with the fact that we're moving money that had been parked overseas with American companies because they were penalized for bringing that back home. The fact that has been removed from the law. And then when companies bring that money back home, the fact that they're induced to invest it back into their companies because they have measures like full business expensing that allow them to recoup the cost of that investment, we're going to see a lot of economic churn here. And this is going to show up for the average American in any number of ways. It will show up with increased wages. We know from the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House that with the corporate tax rate reduction, that will contribute to an increase in productivity for workers and an increase in wages. But we'll see that also for companies that are using that money for stock buybacks and reinvesting in their own companies. A vast majority of Americans are participating in the stock market in one way or the other, either through their pensions or their retirement accounts. So when those companies are able to invest back into those equities, Americans see that in their own savings accounts, and that's good for Americans. And we'll see that kind of economic growth and those kinds of metrics that Americans for so long have seen as being stagnant are going to finally start to shake loose. And Republicans, as they move into campaign mode in the fall, need to remind Americans that as a result of what they did in the last year, which is passing the Tax Reform Act.
So when you say reminding them, this is where the rubber meets the road, and sometimes the Republicans, their message gets drowned out. It's not readily apparent that they're talking about an issue. And with the clamping down of Facebook on conservative sites, Twitter, YouTube, all the social media giants are basically saying, you Republicans aren't going to get any play over here. How do they communicate with us? How do they get Americans back on? Because what I'm noticing now is, I read an article about how Facebook has met their max when it comes to garnering new users that are younger. So the growth that they could experience if they could garner new, younger users would be unlimited. Like the future would be so bright. But since younger people, millennials especially, like the bottom half of the millennials and everybody younger than them, all view Facebook as something for old people or their moms or things like that. And they're constantly searching for that new platform. And now Facebook is under heavy scrutiny for their actions towards other businesses that they've gobbled up, like WhatsApp and Instagram. Facebook can dominate the news for people my age and, in my bracket and up. But for the people below, it's a wide open field for the Republicans to talk to them, because those people, they're on YouTube, but they are not, they don't care about Facebook. They don't care about the scandal. They're just like, Facebook's not my thing. So how will the Republicans get this message out there? I love what you've articulated, but how do they get other people to hear it?
Yeah, so I agree with you entirely that the ecosystem for communication will continue to change. And one of the criticisms of Republicans has always been that we are slow to change with it, and we're not recognizing and meeting new audiences where they are. So part of that is being innovative in the way we deliver that message. The House Republican Conference, the chair of the House Republican Conference is Kathy McMorris Rogers, a member from Washington State, and she has been very invested in this cause, recognizing that we can't keep talking to our same audiences and we need to reach out and push ourselves to be on platforms where other people are. So she has actually led a movement that incentivizes members of Congress to get on these different social media platforms. So whether that be Twitter or Snapchat, Instagram, any of these platforms where there's new audiences that aren't just Facebook, she induces members to do so by competing against one another to get more followers or to get really high performing content. So she does a fabulous job for that. But a member of Congress is a member of Congress. We all know that it's really hard sometimes for politicians to go home and talk to voters, and for voters to see them the same way as if you and I were delivering this message. So I do think it's incumbent upon people like us who are true believers in the pro-growth movement and believe that policy has the opportunity to offer more prosperity to people and to have examples of policy when it changes. It's up to us to point out what those changes are and how they have a real-world impact, because it's so easy to get caught in the day in, the day out, the talk of policy that never really ever changes here in Washington. So I think that those of us who have platforms, if you have a radio show, if you have a Twitter following, talking about your own experiences and your own interactions with the changes in the tax code, I think can be very powerful. Stories are always a great way to connect with an audience. So talking about why keeping an extra $100 a month in your paycheck is important to you, I think is a great way to drive that message home. And I think that conservatives have been very savvy about this. I think that, the work that I do in Washington, D.C., I work both with National Taxpayers Union, which is one of the oldest taxpayer advocate groups in the country, along with Independent Women's Forum, which is a group that focuses on how policy affects women in particular, but with the argument that all issues are women's issues because they are. We all have separate audiences that we talk to daily about policy issues that are important to us and important to them. So I see it as my responsibility as someone who really believes that these types of policy changes are good for everyone in the country to use those platforms to convey that message. And I would also say, too, that, the onus is on Democrats to explain why they didn't support the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. There's not a single Democrat on record voting in favor of giving Americans their own money back. There was not a single Democrat who voted in favor in cutting the corporate tax rate or giving better business tax systems.
Well, they're actually on the record now as saying they want to repeal the bill. They're, like Nancy Pelosi has said, if they take the House back, they're repealing the tax reform and raising everyone's taxes. So I don't understand how that wins.
Which is wild.
It is. It's kind of the craziest thing I've ever heard. And also some of Clyburn, Democrat Clyburn has said that if they don't take back the House in the midterms, everybody in leadership should be fired. And I'm thinking, well, you're preparing the ground for that because you're talking about raising everyone's taxes. We just got the cut. Most of us aren't even still sure exactly, do we change our exemptions? What are we doing? Is this real? Most people are still trying to figure out how much they're going to save, and they're talking about taking it away.
Right. And it's a little confusing, too, right? Because we just had tax day. So I think there was a little bit of kind of anxiety there where people maybe expected a tax cut without realizing that they were filing their taxes for the previous year. So now that we're past tax day and we've essentially completely bid goodbye to the old tax code, it's full steam ahead. For those of us who are talking about the tax code, we are now in the thick of implementation of our new and improved tax code. And of course, there are still things to fix. There are some things in the tax bill that were made permanent. Some of those things are the individual tax cuts that had a huge impact on individual Americans. So making sure that those individual tax rates are permanent, I think, should be a huge priority for Congress. And Speaker Ryan has said that the House of Representatives is going to take that vote. But you raise a good point about Hoyer saying that these guys should be kicked out if they can't retake the House. If you just look at the House demographics, the House leadership demographics when it comes to Republicans versus Democrats, the differences are stark. The average age of Republican leadership is 50 years old, whereas the average age of Democrat leadership is 72 years old. Yeah. The Democrats all the time want to talk about how Republicans are the ones out of touch and they're the ones who don't understand what's going to be the largest voting bloc in the next couple of years. It's absolutely incorrect. You look at who's actually representing Democrats in Congress, they are decades older than Republican leadership, and their commitment to the staid old ideas of yesterday are showing through.
And well, I'm so glad you shared that, because I not only did I get a good laugh now, but I'm saving some of that mirth up for later, and I'm gonna relive this moment and then giggle about it again. I might even tell my husband, I'm gonna take this moment where I just learned that fact that I hadn't actually known, and I'm going to use it to laugh a few more times. I'm going to save it up like a little bank of laughter that I can whip out.
Wildfire. It's so good.
It's good.
I can't.
It's good stuff.
Like, people get away all the time with talking about how, Republicans are the party of old. Republicans are the party of new. Democrats are the ones who want to take us back to where they were. They're the ones who want to repeal the tax cuts. They're the ones who want to keep Americans in this economic uncertainty who haven't seen their wages rise in almost a decade. They're the ones who rely on this notion that we need a closed economy with no innovation in order to move forward. And all of those ideas are patently false. And as we see the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress continue to be able to implement some of these pro-growth ideas, they're going to continue to be faced with the reality of how wrong those preconceptions are.
I'm enjoying it. And I enjoy the work that you do over at Independent Women's Forum and also Forward Strategies and National Taxpayers Union. Lots of great organizations. Thank you so much, Mattie Duppler. You've been fantastic. And you can find her on my Twitter feed because she tweeted me already. She beat me to the punch. So follow her on Twitter as well. Thank you, Mattie. You've been fantastic.
Thanks, Stacey.
All right. Talk again soon. Hey, that's the music. We'll be back with more Stacey on the Right after these messages. Stay there.
I'm not so certain we have as much time as many of us think. It's high time for the body of Christ to return with a fire lit up under us to proclaiming the truth of God's word, to proclaim the truth.
Standing. I don't understand. Like, it needs to be broken into. People need to throw grenades into it. I don't give a.
Okay, so we cut that off. We just gave you a little taste. That's Rona Jarrett. She's the one who was tweeting last week. She's a professor. She was tweeting about Barbara Bush passing away, and she said I'm so glad that Barbara Bush passed away because I know that people whose last name is Bush are hurting right now, specifically, her son, that he's hurting right now, and that makes me happy. And then she tweeted out, for all of you who don't like what I tweeted, so what? I'm tenured. That's what tenure is all about, being able to express yourself without being worried that you're going to lose your job. And so then she was put on suspension and she locked down her Twitter feed. But it's one of those things where you got to just wonder, wonder some more things about this person. Now, someone, of course, heard what she said and went out and, looked into, hey, has she ever spoken anywhere? Has she ever said anything of note? And what did they find? Yeah, she had. Not only had she spoken somewhere and said things of note, but she said that. Her name is Randa Jarrar. And, she's talking about that the plane hijackers, the ones who did 9/11, that they did a good job, advocates throwing grenades into homes. And where did she used to teach, or where does she teach? Who she's on staff with? It's Fresno State. That was her university. Now the Fresno Bee has the one video where you just heard the bleeping and everything, and she continues talking about the 60s and the 70s and the resistance fighters. She talks about political violence, that leftists need to start throwing grenades. She's talking about Robert Spencer, the leader of the white nationalists. And I mean, I'm not a fan of him or his views or his work, but do we need to kill him? Do we need to destroy his home? What if innocent people are in there? What if there are children present? Should they die too? This is a kind of irresponsible garbage that is promoted on the left, and yet you just say David Hogg didn't get into the universities that he applied to, and you got to lose your job. You got to lose all your advertisers. I mean, these double standards, they have to be called out, and they have to stop. So anyway, that's the audio of her talking like that. You for it, you against it, you got opinion on it. Now, here's this piece, actually, I read it over the weekend. And so if you're 10, 15 years away from retirement, this piece is for you. If you're already in retirement, this article is not about you. If you are 5 years away from retirement, it's probably not about you, because making changes to the retirement system, we've basically gotten ourselves into, as a nation, an impossible quandary. The Democrats emptied out the trust fund. There's no more money there. So the people who are working now are paying for the people who are retired now. But there aren't enough people working now to pay for everyone who's going to retire going forward. So something has to change. So whenever I have this discussion on the show, people call up, they email, they'll say, I can't believe you are saying those things. That's not an entitlement. It's my money. I don't believe it's an entitlement. I know it's your money because I've put into it too. Anyone who's working in America today has had money sucked out of their paycheck and put into the retirement system, the government-run retirement system, Social Security. Here's the problem. It's not going to be, if people are living to 80, 90 years old, and that's the norm now, as opposed to when Social Security was implemented, when people were living, the average age of the American was 61, which is why they started the retirement age at 65, so that the majority of people would kick the bucket before they needed it. So they knew people were going to be putting into it and not pulling out. The problem is, it's a good problem to have. We now have longer life expectancy because we take better care of ourselves and we have better health care. Our country is safer than it's ever been before. So you've got a Social Security Act that was passed in 1935, and people in 2018 are trying to live on it and make plans. So the percentage of the workforce representing workers over 65 has doubled since 1992. This trend is expected to continue unabated. There is no end in sight. If you plot the increase in life expectancy along with the increase in work life expectancy, the average age at which people stop working, the two actually merge in the year 2100. So the joke for this writer is, he says, if the work trend line continues on its trajectory after 2100, everyone will be working after they're dead. So, I mean, jokes aside, advances in longevity are making supporting retirement for another 20 or 30 years impossible for 90% of all U.S. workers. So basically, I will be in the mall. This has happened to you. I know it has. You'll be somewhere and someone who they're walking faster than you. They look healthier than you. They're actually more bright and energetic than you. And you find out that they're retired. They're 66 years old. Retirement in and of itself, like stopping working at a certain age, that's not biblical. And when we look at our current entitlement system, it is unsustainable. So the question is, how do we begin to increase the retirement age so that able-bodied Americans who are in jobs that they love can continue to work, and other people can go into what this writer calls Act 3, or your third act. So 34% of workers have no savings whatsoever. 35% of workers have less than $1,000. Of the remaining 31%, less than half of those have more than $10,000. Among older workers between 50 and 55, the median savings is $8,000. That's their total savings, including their retirement accounts. So these people are not ready to retire. You cannot be ready to retire on $8,000 plus what Social Security is going to pay unless you're going to drastically reduce your standard of living. So the truth is, we're doing this huge disservice to society by setting retirement as an end goal to a long career, which, again, a lot of studies show that for people who stop working after 65, they greatly increase their rate of mortality because you got nothing to do unless you've got tons of money stashed away and you can spend all of your time traveling. So U.S. workers, you've got this 50 plus trillion in wealth that boomers have, which is an astounding number. And they're transferring that money to millennials and Generation Z. And that's not just their retirement accounts, that's all of their assets. But 80% of that wealth, that 50 plus trillion, is concentrated among less than 20% of the boomers. So the other 80% of the boomers, they're not passing anything down. So even if you're lucky enough to be among the 20% who have the 1 million plus in net worth, and you've saved up enough to retire, there is some evidence that the classic notion of retirement may actually be harmful to your health. So The Guardian recently wrote an article about research on aging and retirement, and they had this really interesting take on it. The article is entitled Research, or it's about healthy retirement. And they did research on 2,956 people who were part of a healthy retirement study, which was founded by the National Institute on Aging in America, and found that healthy retirees who worked a year longer over the age of 65 had 11% lower all-cause mortality risk. And even the unhealthy group reduced their likelihood of dying by 9% if they delayed retirement. An analysis of the study was also published in the Harvard Business Review. So, we can't paint this with a broad brush. People who are struggling to maintain their work-life balance because they're not healthy, and retirement would be, good for them because they would be able to better take care of themselves and they would be able to get more rest and relaxation. That's a whole different story. But that is not the case for the majority of Americans. The majority of Americans who are currently working, who are reaching retirement age, are not going to retire because their health is going to force them into retirement. There are other factors that are impacting that. So every one of the suggestions that have been fielded for tackling the problem that we have somehow keeps this like 20-year span from age 65 to 85 where you're just sitting around doing nothing. You're in retirement, but you need all this money to live. The third act represents an opportunity for people to do something fantastic, which is they can keep working. So we're talking about staying on at your wonderful job or constructing a third act. You need about 5 to 10 years to build up the needed resources to enter into another career field. And by that, I mean, so let's say you're 40 and you're thinking, when I reach 65, I no longer want to do this job, whatever that job is. Well, you would want to start in about 5 years to figure out what that next job is that you want to do, so you can start training, creating, whatever you need to do to go into that field and be prepared, whether it's open your own bookstore or your own business or start a knitting business, start a business making whatever. You're going to have to start that before your actual retirement. So you can retire from your first, your main career that was the bulk of your life and go into something that you plan to continue to do until you can no longer work anymore. And it may not pay as much. It may not be your big stellar career, but you're to have some kind of savings to help bridge that and to help get you where you need to go. So this idea that we have the federal government and it's going to take care of us in our old age based on money that we've contributed, the politicians have made sure that that's never going to be the case. And there is no fixing it other than to start to wean people off of the idea that the money that they paid the government for their own retirement is going to be there. The politicians have stolen it and spent it on other things. This is what we know. So you'll get something back, but it won't be nearly enough to take care of you. They're not investing it correctly. The government shouldn't be in charge of our retirement. That's the point. So what the people over at Inc. magazine are trying to do is to get people to start thinking about this before we're all caught up in this situation where we're relying on retirement money that the government has forcibly lifted from our paychecks and taken and is spending on current retirees, that money will have grown somehow because it was invested. It's not. And then would be there for us. So we need to have in mind that there's a third act, that 65 is not the end. So Inc.com did a survey of 560 people, and they asked respondents if they could agree. Do you agree with the statement? I love what I'm doing so much, I can't imagine doing anything else. 15% absolutely agreed. 50% did not, or did somewhat. And the idea here is, if you're doing something that you absolutely couldn't imagine quitting, then you have to make provisions so that you can do that going forward. And if it's something that you don't want to continue to do, what would you like to do as you get older, but you're still active, you're still wanting to get out of the house every day, and you're still wanting to earn a living? And how can you build that up between now and the age of 65 so that you can seamlessly transition into that at your own pace, or continue to work your current job until it is up and running, this new thing, and then transition at your own desired point, so you're in control of it. And so for everyone who is, if you're 40 and younger, this has to be the way that you think of it. You can't be looking forward to 65 and thinking you're going to kick back and just put your feet up and the government's going to take care of you. Now, if you are wise with your money and you sock your money away and you continue to invest, and in the down times you pour more money into your accounts, and you get your yield back, and you have that $1 million or more saved up by the time, which obviously in 20 years, $1 million won't be enough. You'll need more like $1.5 million or $2 million with inflation. You have that socked away, and retiring early is what you want to do. That's fine. But retirement as a concept for every single American supported by the government is something that we have to get away from. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can start moving into something that really fits what Americans are actually living. The way we're living is that a 65-year-old person now looks like what a 50-year-old person looked 25 years ago. An 80-year-old person is now what a 65-year-old person was back when Social Security was implemented in the 30s. That's the truth. So these younger looking, more able-bodied, healthier, mentally sharp individuals will need to have something to do with their time that brings in some income if they have not created a viable nest egg for retirement. And really, even the term retirement, maybe that's not the way we should describe it. So Inc.com is calling it your third act. And I think that sounds kind of smart. And I want to just cover this just one more time, just circle back around to it, because I think what ends up happening is when you start talking about retirement, people just put their walls up, they close their ears off, and all they hear is, she doesn't want me to get my money that I put in the government. What I want doesn't have anything to do with it. You know why? Because I'm not in charge of that policy. And there's nothing that one person can do to change what the government has done with those trillions of dollars they've collected from millions of Americans under the guise of saving it for our retirement. 35% of American workers have less than 1,000 saved, and 34% have zero. Less than half of the remaining 31% have more than 10,000 saved. So they're not retiring. You can collect retirement from the government, but it's not going to sustain you. So what are we going to do? The third act is what they're recommending. I'll put the link up on the show. Thank you so much for being here. I am in Washington, D.C. at the White House tomorrow. I'll report more on that on my Twitter feed at Stacey on the Right. Thanks for being with us today. God bless.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of Urban Family Talk, Urban Family Communications, or American Family Association.